Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about software companies and gatekeeping. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how can a software company strive to become more open and avoid gatekeeping? You will have to know how to effectively organize your teams and the work that they do in such a way that they can work independently. And how to do that is it's many novels of content. Usually, there's a lot of books related on this. So I'll try to give you as much as I have found in the minutes that we have here together. So usually the thing that is missing for a lot of companies when it comes to scaling up is an understanding of how scale affects the communication and productivity of individual teams. And I usually like to say that the hardest problem that you have in a software company in many cases is the slicing up of the domain. How do you slice things? Who should own what? How should the ownership look? Etc. etc. Because unfortunately, it's unfortunately the case that the simplest model is usually that you slice things up in domains. As I was mentioning, this is one of the hardest problems, because what happens when you create a domain is that when you have two things within the domain, so let's say that you have orders and you have users, and these two domains in terms of code, they are moved to two different teams. Well, then whenever something happens in one of these teams, then that team has to connect with the other team in order to do something, or like to make an update, like they are dependent on each other. And this is where the gatekeeping comes from. If you have people who are blocking other people from doing the work that they want to do, that's basically, well, it's an unsolvable situation. It's unsolvable for the team with that current management structure. And this is, I think, the key to effective management. How do you figure out how you reduce the gatekeeping down to the lowest amount that is possible? And the best example here is, for example, operations. A lot of companies have a dedicated ops team that handle everything from setting up environments to maintaining like uptimes, etc., etc. And in many cases, they handle deployment as well. That is a gatekeeper, a very dangerous gatekeeper, because usually whenever the team needs to do anything within their own infrastructure or something like that, they can't really do it, because they have to send a ticket to a central team usually that is usually bombarded by requests on a daily basis. I like to say that if you want to feel how it feels to be in the trenches in IT, go and work in the ops teams, DevOps or like something like that. This is where they are. They have millions and millions and millions of requests we were talking about like really large companies now. It's the things that they have to do is enormous. And so in a modern way of thinking about this problem, most companies are trying to go towards a model where you have self-empowered teams, which is how you try to reduce gatekeepers within your organization. You try to move as much of the responsibilities that you can to the teams themselves, so they can own, you build it your own type of mentality. And the same thing goes for when it comes to team communication. The key factor here is that you have to understand that the gatekeeping comes when one team needs a change from another team that only that team can facilitate. And there is something very powerful about that observation. That means that the problem isn't really that someone has one part of the domain and somebody else has another part of the domain or owns something else. The problem is that the way that the people who are the gatekeepers are handling requests and so forth, or like the way that this interaction works, is that one party is going to ask another party to do something on their behalf because they cannot, they don't own it, or it's not their area, or they don't know how to do it, etc., etc. And it is in that area, that space, I believe the solution lies. Because, as I was saying, the idea for saying something in the DevOps community, or like the DevOps movement, is to move more of the operations towards the team, and having that mentality where they should own their own setups and so forth, to empower them to do the changes that are necessary, which reduces the amount of gatekeeping. That is one manifestation of that. But the same sort of thing can happen between teams, and it's one of the reasons why I am a big fan of having of the monorepo model. I didn't used to be, but I've sort of seen the light, in my opinion, at the very least, on this one, because the ideal state for any given team in a distributed system, or like in a large company, is to be able to make any change to the system as a whole that is necessary in order to deliver the thing that they need to be delivered. Because the reason why you have these blockers and all these third-party dependencies is because you have to ask somebody else to do it for you, and they usually don't have time, or there's a lot of syncing necessary. But if you have a situation where if it's just quote-unquote your code, I mean, nobody is a gatekeeper in their own, you don't have almost any gatekeepers in your own team. Because it's your code, you touch it, you move it, you do whatever the fuck you want with it almost every single day. That state is what you need to achieve for the entire company. And how do you do this? As I said, I've always found the simplest way of doing it is actually to first and foremost follow, as I've said in a few videos, follow the McDonald's principle. Every single project in your company should feel familiar to anyone in any other project. I'm not saying that everybody has to use exactly the same libraries or something like that. What I'm saying is that absolute highest level consistency is desirable. If you can get everybody to use the same stack, that is a very big and a very good thing. If you can align everybody on using the same major frameworks, the same major tooling, such as, let's say that you're using Java as an example, everybody uses Spring Boot, no discussion, that's it. And everybody is part of the monorepo. What happens when that happens is that every single team now knows, even though that this other area, like this other domain, like if you said you were in the order team or you were in the user team and you don't know anything about orders or you don't know anything about users, at the very least you know where the code is. It's in the same repo as yours. You have it on your local machine. It's not in the folder that you usually use, but it's there. And it has the exact same stack as you have. That means that although it might take a little bit longer for you, you can now effectively go and change that code and unblock yourself. Assuming that there are, that you get a little bit of hints here and there, but you can do the work yourself. And then using things like code owners or similar sort of functionality, where like the team that actually owns the code has to review the code that you just submitted. Well, now the only gatekeeping they have to do now is to actually verify that the thing that you changed is actually, that it got changed. And that is the minimum, in my opinion, level of gatekeeping that you can achieve in any software company. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that I think that you solve the problem of gatekeeping is to first and foremost understand that the more teams can do by themselves, the better. And there are so many ways you can achieve this. We can talk about GitOps, we can talk about all kinds of stuff. I don't have time to go through all of these different things that you could do. There's a lot of books on the topic. My personal favorite, my personal tip to you is to actually, as I said, try to get to a point where the teams are no longer necessarily asking others to do stuff for them, because that is where the problem lies. You have to get things to a point where they can just go and do it themselves. They might need some onboarding, they might need some hand-holding, and it's good to have a review by someone who, say, owns the code or owns the setup or something like that, so that everything looks fine. But you have to remove this fear of touching quote-unquote somebody else's code as quickly as humanly possible. And a monorepo with code owners and the McDonald's setup where like everybody's sort of on the same technology is the most surefire way that you can reach that point. Guaranteed. Have a great day.